I like pickup trucks.
Yeah, you own one.
I do, and I am forced to also like large SUVs due to family situations and obligations. There are laws against you just leaving your kids at home when they're under certain ages.
Oh, imagine that.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? I say that. I don't know if there is an actual law that stops you from leaving your kids at home, but there's like child endangerment things that they get you under. So I think it's okay. We had this problem with one of my kids as my kids get older. It's like, when can you leave them at home? And regardless, I need a vehicle that can fit the family at some point. And this week, pretty cool SUV or was it last week? When was this unveiled? Is it last
What
week? This week?
uh
We're going to talk about the Scout, just FYI.
late last week.
Late last week. Okay, so a lot of people have already talked about it, but we are first with the news, which means we miss the later in the news with our podcast. I'm Phil Royle. I want to get to these topics. I've been doing content creation and journalism, and according to one of our YouTube comments, been spewing false information uh, for 20 plus years. Um, I've I'm off track
But
already.
we're bringing you truth today.
Well, I thought we were bringing truth before. And so youtube.com/ at the walk car. Somebody made a comment about one of our past videos. So we do this podcast. You can also watch this in video format, which we've just recently started doing. Somebody left a scathing comment, and I was going back in there to just say, hey, what did I get wrong? And they deleted their comment before I even got there. So I wonder if they realized that
I think it's just because you didn't agree with them.
I guess I don't know. And where else I like people to go to is thewhatcar.com/store, where you can help support the blog and the podcast and the YouTube channel, I guess, by purchasing merchandise, which if you're watching the video right now, you can see Ed styling some of that. Me, I'm not wearing any of that. I'm wearing a Carol Shelby shirt. So,
There you go.
part of my other life there. I think I've gone on for long enough. I've already slowed this podcast down. You get us going again.
All right, I'll pick up the baton. Ed Sanchez, likewise, 20 plus years in automotive content creation and moderation, day job, automotive electronics industry analyst, and co-founder and contributor to the What Car blog and podcast.
I feel like I'm going to be all over the place in this episode because I just downed a soda. And I tried never to do that before an
Well, try
episode.
not to belch into the mic.
The problem is I already talk fast. So many podcasts that I listen to, I listen to at 1.2 or 1.25 because people just talk too slow for me. So I just got a lot of information. I just want to, spew it all out there. So I talk at the same rate that I listen to a lot of podcasts. But I feel like I won't be able to re-listen to this podcast at 1.25, the amount of sugar rush I got going. Okay, let's talk about actual content. Scout.
Scout. So this, I would say fairly highly anticipated vehicle. This has been hinted at for, gosh, I want to say probably about 2 years, I'd say, that we
Somewhere
first
around
heard
there.
rumblings about this.
Now,
Mhm.
if you follow along on our social media, you will see that the tag, whatever the bit of text, the teaser text that was put in
Mhm.
there was, this came out of, Scout kind of came out of left field for some people.
Some
And,
people.
well,
I, s-
it, its
I saw it coming,
origins,
but
its origins, yes, and you called it like
yeah,
right as an acquisition happened, but it was an acquisition of like a truck. Let's go back. Let's go back. Scout existed back in the, what was that,
I think
70s?
70s, the last one was produced in the early 80s, I think.
And that
Um,
was
yeah.
through not Volkswagen.
No,
And
International Harvester.
and of course, International Harvester making cars. Uh, the name doesn't seem to align with that, but whatever. And then they got purchased by Volkswagen a handful of years ago, and that was when you went, aha,
Hmm.
there's a Scout name involved with this.
Yep.
And that's where it kind of came out of left field, I think, was who expected Volkswagen to make an acquisition on wasn't it like heavy equipment stuff?
Well, long story short, Volkswagen purchased Navistar, which was a heavy
Okay.
truck brand, like Class 8. I mean, they did like Class 6, I'd say 6 through 8 trucks. And prior to that, the Harvester comes from their brand that was spun off to Case. I don't know if you've heard of Case tractors, but there was
Yes.
a
Yeah,
company
yeah.
called IH Case who basically bought the agricultural equipment division. So what was left of International were heavy trucks. But as part of that
Also.
acquisition, yeah, also as part of that acquisition, Volkswagen got the rights to the Scout uh, name and trademark. So that was lost on a lot of people, or it was they didn't see the significance of it. They were
Well,
like,
because who'd bring
oh,
back the Scout
yeah,
name, and who's
mhm,
Volkswagen to bring that back? Well, apparently Volkswagen would bring it back, and who's
yeah,
Volkswagen to bring it back? Volkswagen's Volkswagen. They would do what they want.
yeah. So
So
anyway, I kind of
yada
saw
yada
this.
yada. Here we are.
Here we are. Okay, not to pat myself on the back, but I saw this. I think a long time before a lot of other people did, because I realized that Scout was part of their acquisition of Navistar, and it had been like sitting dormant for decades.
I thought
They
you were
hadn't really
crazy,
done anything.
to be honest.
I said, just watch the space, and ta-da, here we go.
Yeah, here we are. So they've unveiled what? The Traveler and the Terra,
Yeah,
which the Traveler is an SUV and the Terra is a pickup.
yep.
Now, I don't know much about the Scout name. About the only thing I know is that there's a Scout 2 that I drive by every single day. Actually, I walk by
Hmm.
it on my way to school to drop off my kids. It's an old rusted out Scout just sitting on the side of the road. So that's about
Hmm.
my full knowledge. Did the original Scout have a pickup truck?
Yes, it was called. I want to say the 80 or something, the Scout 80,
Hmm.
or yeah. So there was both a pickup and SUV variant. These are both 4 door. The originals were both 2 doors, obviously. Um, but yeah, I mean, there obviously is there some inspiration from the originals and the new ones, but clearly, you know, just the any similarities are just skin deep. Because I mean, obviously the new one's completely different animal than
I
the
just pulled
original.
up a pictures of them, and
Mhm.
sure enough, they had a pickup.
Yes, they did have a pickup.
I
So
can
this
confirm
isn't
this.
just some contrived like, oh, let's do this. It's like, no, there is historical precedent for it if, if you want to bring that into the discussion. But anyway, the new ones are, I would say all of them are electrified. More on that a little later. Um, so the original idea is these would be launched as EVs, but I guess somewhere along the development track or in the discussions, we're like, oh, maybe we should do a range extended model. And so they announced that at the unveiling last week. They said there would also be a range extended model.
But even there,
Yeah.
it's not like a bad range extender. It's a long distance. Like it's a big battery with a range extender. It's not like a tiny
Yeah, I
battery.
mean, it's I guess from that standpoint, it's similar to like the Ram Charger.
Yep.
If I had to guess, um, they I don't believe they announced battery capacity at the initial introduction.
I have not seen that number,
I
but
would guess on the non range extended model, it's probably easily going to be over 100 kilowatt hours. Um, on the range extended model, my guess would be probably 80 to 90 kilowatt hours
well, they're
about.
saying 350 miles of EV range. Let me break
Mhm.
out my calculator here, because I'm no good at math. But if you take 350 miles and you divide that by 2.5, you get to 140 kilowatt hours if it
Okay.
averages two and a
So
half miles per kilowatt hour. So you could probably say these are going to be like 120 kilowatt hour.
120 to 140,
Yeah, somewhere in that
probably.
range.
Yeah.
And then if they're going to get 100, now the range extender is supposed to be like, wasn't it 150 miles?
Well,
Something like
the
that.
the difference is they're saying about 350 for the full EV models and
Yeah.
approximately 500 for the range extended.
So
So,
I thought I read somewhere that it was 150 miles on the range extended, 150 electric, and then the rest
mhm.
is thanks to the range extender. And that, if you work it out at 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour, that's 60 kilowatt hour battery. But it doesn't work out that way because of the way range extenders work and it kicks in, kicks out. So that could be a 50 or 60 kilowatt hour battery. It's not
I
insignificant.
would think it's maybe the battery might be a little bigger than that.
It'd be nice if it were. Bigger
I'm
batteries,
gonna
smaller range
spitball.
extenders.
I'm gonna guess the battery size on the harvester, and I guess we'll find out sooner or later. I'm gonna I'm gonna say 80 to 90 kilowatt hours. I'm just throwing it out there. So
That'd be nice. All right. What are the others? Because for all I know, they did announce this and we all we just missed it.
I tried to skim over pretty
I tried
thoroughly, but
I tried to
I could
skim
have
over
missed
it
it.
pretty thoroughly. Story of
Yeah.
my life, Ed. All right.
All right.
So now interesting thing.
Mhm.
Let's go over some of the numbers real quick. 7,000 pound towing capacity on the Traveler, the SUV. Ten
Mhm.
thousand pound on the Terra, which I keep thinking Terror. If you watch that Netflix series, The Terror, it's really good. It's anyway, it's about a boat and exploration into
All
the
right.
Arctic, and it's really good. It's really good. 10,000 pound towing capacity on the Terra, payload 2,000 ish pounds, and what, 1,000 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. Presumably, that's the all electric
Mhm.
version of one or both. Who knows? But that puts it
Yep.
right in par with most of these pickup trucks.
Quicker
That's
than it needs to be, as you would say.
yeah. Uh, what are we getting at? 350 kilowatt hour DC fast charging, but it's body on frame. So this is what I enjoyed.
Hmm.
Body on frame with an E axle. So
Hmm.
solid rear axle, and it's an
With the
old. We don't know who
integral
makes it.
integrated motor. I'm gonna guess maybe Magna
That's the
because
big
they
name that
already
we know.
announced they were gonna do something like this.
And they
They could
announced
be, yeah.
that was several years ago. They announced this E axle, and I believe at the time I was like, "Oh, this would be awesome," because I would love to throw an E axle under my F-250 because I love my older
Hmm.
F-250,
Hmm.
and then I could just throw an E axle on it. There's so much room for batteries under there. I could pack that thing with batteries, and it'd be a great little vehicle.
Hmm.
But the Magna E-Beam or whatever it was
They
called,
call the e-beam, yeah.
that was not. They weren't marketing that for sale to Phil. They were marketing that for sale to other companies. And I believe at the time I was like, man, Nissan could use something
Hmm.
like that where they don't really have the money to develop something. Then you
Hmm.
could just take the Titan, throw the e-axle in it, and
Yeah.
it'd be great. So apparently, either Scout slash Volkswagen just called up Magna, or they called up somebody else, or they developed it themselves. We don't
Or
know.
it's in-house. We
Yeah,
don't really know, but
but that's the solution.
yeah.
It's a solid axle with a motor attached to it,
Hmm.
and I don't fully I that sent me down a rabbit hole as to what the advantages are of a solid axle.
Well,
And do you know?
I spent long enough. Now, granted, I don't have the chops. I'm like not a hardcore off-road guy, but I did work for a truck publication for the better part of a decade. And so I read enough stuff, wrote enough stories to know the hypothetical advantage of a solid axle. So basically, the the thought is if you have a solid axle off-roading, it will articulate and it will move the vernacular term they use, and ironically, this is gonna go
It's
live on
timely.
on
Yeah, timely.
Halloween, so it works. It's called the pumpkin, but pumpkin is essentially the differential. It's the little bulge in the middle of the axle, which in this case will house an electric motor and a differential from what I'm understanding. But with the solid axle going over rocks and terrain, it will move that up and presumably out of the way of rocks and obstacles. Whereas in a truck like the Rivian R1T, the F-150 Lightning, which are independent rear, the differential is fixed and the um, propulsion goes out through half shafts that go to either wheel. So the wheels and tires are moving up and down, but the differential and unlike an EV, the motor unit stays put. And hypothetically, that makes it a little more vulnerable to rocks and terrain, whereas solid axle, it'll move dynamically, as a single piece, but the advantage to that is as the wheels and tires are going up and down, it moves the differential with it, presumably out of the way. That's not to say you couldn't still get it, caught up on something, but
Yeah.
that's why kind of hardcore off-roaders like it is they see that as an advantage.
It's
Um,
also very durable.
mhm,
It's the axles are protected in a big
mhm.
steel sheath that runs the
Steel
length.
tube, yeah.
Yeah. And so I get the off-road thing.
Mhm,
That's the big advantage that I can see, that it's very durable. It takes the
mhm,
connections to the hubs and the wheels
mhm,
and it raises them up. You got independent suspension and you've always got the lower arm that's always pretty low.
mhm,
So it gets things out of the way as well. It's easy to lift because
mhm.
you can just space them up and you can do all this. But when you
Yeah.
get into this is independent front suspension. This is like
Mhm,
my old Jeep Liberty. I used to have a Cherokee and that
mhm.
was solid front and rear axle. And then that,
I would say this is like most full-size trucks are have this setup.
yeah,
Independent front, solid axle
yep,
rear.
yep.
So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
was gonna say like my F-250, but my F-250 is not really
Well, it's twin
independent
I-beam, right?
front. Yeah, it's
Which
well,
is
it's
quasi-independent, but
yeah.
yeah.
But the FJ Cruiser that I mentioned a while back,
Mhm,
uh, a episode or two ago, that was the same way, independent front, solid rear. So I get the off-roading thing. It's a little weird, that you do just the rear, not the front and the rear, if you were going to go for off-roading, but whatever. So I started looking up, is there advantages for towing? And man, you look on some towing forums and some people are like, yeah, but um, it's
It
not this like it's not like with off-roading where there is a definite advantage. This
yeah,
seems to be more of like a durability thing
yeah,
because it's solid chunks of steel.
yeah. I mean, in theory, it'll maintain camber,
Hmm.
whereas
That was the big one for them.
with
Yeah.
independent rear, you put a lot of weight in it, it'll want to it'll kind of induce negative camber,
Yeah.
which could result in excessive tire wear, where I guess basically you'd have excessive wear on the inside, I guess, if I'm
Yeah.
understanding the
Yeah. Yeah.
geometry right.
You'd have that. And then in
Um,
theory, you could have you'd have less um track surface area, whatever, of the tire
mhm,
touching the ground. In
mhm,
theory, I mean, you're putting a lot of weight on it, so it's going to
mhm.
kind of squish it down a little bit, but
Now you
you
can
might have,
mitigate with that with load leveling. I mean, sometimes
yeah,
they do that.
yeah. So
Um,
you'd have to like bag your car
yeah.
or your truck, whatever.
The other hypothetical advantage, and it's very slight, but I think, and again, all the haters on YouTube or whoever, you can call us out and tell me this is a bunch of BS.
And
But
then delete your comment right after, as the other guy did.
I believe there's actually a small efficiency advantage of a solid axle because with the independent rear, you have basically CV joints on both ends, on both the differential end and the wheel end. So you're introducing friction, whereas in a solid axle, I mean, there's still internal bearings, but I think hypothetically there's less frictional loss in that from the motor to the wheels.
Mm.
So I mean, probably a marginal difference, but I mean, you know, possibly enough of a difference where, you know, maybe a couple more miles of range or something. I don't know.
Now, this setup also gets you, because I'm assuming the motor mounts perpendicular to the chassis of the vehicle, and then it goes to a ring and pinion that then goes out. And if that's the case, then you could do like traditional locking differentials. You could do like air lockers or whatever you want to do
Hmm.
on something like that. If it uses a pre-existing like ring and pinion setup that
Hmm.
you can set these things to. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Hmm.
Um I
Yeah, they
couldn't.
really stress the mechanical locking part, which again, getting back to the whole off-road kind of,
Yep. And
you
that's
know,
where I think a
hardcore
lot of
bona
these
fides, I think they were really trying to play that up.
you
So,
see a lot of things with the Cybertruck. I've seen it with the Rivians where
mhm,
they've gone to go off-roading and man, and I've said this for years. I said this back to the early 2000s. These e-diffs that they do on
mhm,
like that because back in the day, we were big into Volkswagens and stuff and
mhm,
Volkswagen and with like the fourth gen. started introducing like these e-diffs instead of,
Hmm.
putting in
Where they manage it with the ABS and
yeah, and
stuff. Yeah.
it's never as good. It's
Hmm.
never, it wears through your brakes. It isn't a great system.
Hmm.
There's very little that's as good as a mechanical locked system.
Hmm.
What I fear with this, and we've spent like 10 minutes on an axle, is the disadvantage that I can find of a solid axle is
Hmm.
it's a lot of unsprung weight that you've got to manage.
Hmm.
And I've got one of my other vehicles that I've got a whole fleet, but one
Hmm.
of my other vehicles is a Yukon, and
Hmm.
that's a solid rear independent
Hmm.
front.
Hmm.
And you can feel a difference in that
Hmm.
when you go over bumps. You can feel the back trying to handle. I don't know how much an axle weighs,
Hmm.
500 pounds. I have no idea. I mean,
Hmm.
the wheels and tires alone attached to the thing are like 70 pounds each or something
Hmm. Hmm.
ridiculous. So you add in the axle and the diff and the drive shaft and all of this, and it's a very heavy piece of equipment that you are
Hmm.
then propelling down the road at 75 miles an hour and hitting a bump. And you've
Hmm.
got springs and shocks trying to control all of this. So that's a downside to all of this. But, maybe technology's gotten better since 2004 when I got my Yukon.
Well, I mean, I think getting back to you were wondering, oh, why did they do independent front, solid rear? I think it was a compromise. It was a trade-off between on-road handling and manners and off-road capability. And I think that's why, because I don't know if you've driven a Wrangler. Um, Frankly, they kind of suck on the road, in
Oh,
my
I mean, my
opinion.
my Cherokee was like
Yeah.
one of the worst
Solid front, solid
driving.
rear.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was one of the worst driving vehicles you
Um,
could get
so
on
a
my
solid
commute.
front gives you very vague steering response, very easily kind of upset and gets kind of wobbly and kind of whereas a front independent front generally gives you better driving manners. So I think they made the right call with independent front, solid rear. I was actually a little surprised they went with solid rear, but I kind
I
of
was too.
see.
I'm happy with it. I
No,
think
no,
it's
I
what
think it's
we
fine.
need.
I think it brings more diversity to
Hmm.
the EV segment, the EV truck and SUV segment. I actually think this could potentially appeal to, say, like Wrangler 4xe or Gladiator
That's who I
4xe
think
owners
this
that
is
are
a
like,
warning
ooh,
shot. This is
yeah,
a definite warning shot.
yeah. And even the pricing is not that far. I mean, long gone are the days when Wranglers are cheap. Okay. A well-equipped new Wrangler, you're looking at least $50,000. And well-equipped, I mean, they can go well into the 70s. The 392 is over 100. So, I mean, forget about any kind of budget
Yeah.
considerations with that. So, I would say cost-wise, specs-wise,
Talk about the
hardware.
cost.
Okay, so they are okay with incentives. So this is where it gets tricky, and especially not too long after you listen to this, we're going to have a certain event happening that may have some bearing on these uh, credits and incentives. Anyway, um, so they entry price um, minus any incentives or credits around they're saying starting price under 60,000. They're saying with credits and incentives as low as they're claiming 51,500. So just a hair with credits and incentives, a hair over 50, but even without those, about $60,000. So
And the note
that's
that I see is
yeah.
that's for the
Mhm.
Traveler. So the SUV is the cheaper of the two.
Um, I'm yeah, presumably, which is kind of odd. A lot of people would expect the pickup to be cheaper, but
Yeah. So
yeah.
50,000 as low as Traveler, retail price starting under 60. No, they're both listed as under 60, but it says Traveler entry level model starting as low as 50,000, Terra entry model starting as low as 51.5. So there could be a $1,500
Yeah, so I mean,
leave.
small difference, but
Yeah.
they're both in the same ballpark. And like I said, I would say for a comparably equipped Wrangler or Gladiator, which would be the Jeep pickup equivalent. I mean, you're right there in terms of the price, I think.
And
Um,
if you could get, because these are also, I don't remember the some of the specs I don't have written down, but 5.5 foot bed with no make gate. You wrote a little note.
yeah.
Uh,
Missed opportunity.
not everything can be perfect, Ed. Split tailgate on the Traveler, which is kind of cool. Cabana sunroof, refrigerated compartment in the center console, book
Or
or
or tree
or
cross bench seating,
oh yeah,
which a lot of people got pretty excited about. So,
I so I've heard the argument of, well, I use my center console for everything, and in my
mhm,
truck I store a lot of stuff in that center console. I got a lot of tools in there, all stuff that you might need, screwdrivers,
mhm,
wrenches, whatever that you don't want to carry a full toolbox everywhere. If I'm going to the track, I take a full toolbox. But just for
yeah,
like going camping or whatever, I only need a handful of things. So I have like some cheater tools in
mhm,
there. But and I don't remember if it was my model truck you could get with a front bench,
mhm,
but it also folded down, I think, a console. So
mhm,
so the console folded up and then it was a full bench, and then you fold it
mhm,
down and now you got a console. And I was like, that's the action right there.
mhm,
It's not as deep because mine's a console that goes all the way down to the ground. So mine's like a
mhm,
foot deep. So you
mhm.
wouldn't get that. But still, like there are many times I could have used a bench
Yeah.
in my truck. So I am all about that. But what we haven't written down, I believe it's about as wide as my F-250.
Oh, it's very wide. I read somewhere they're saying without even counting the mirrors, it's over 90 inches wide, which is
So I
yeah.
read that same thing, and then I looked up how wide my truck is, and my truck's about 80 inches according to the
Uh,
internet. I can't believe it's 10 inches wider than my truck. My truck doesn't fit anywhere already. And that would be 80 inches without the mirrors. And my mirrors are,
yeah.
I tow, so I got massive things sticking out. It
Hmm.
looks like I was about to throw a British reference in there, but I don't know if King Charles would mean anything to anybody with how big the mirrors are. But uh, it's wide, regardless,
Yeah.
without confirming how wide it is. It's a very wide vehicle, which makes it wider than the Rivian.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
substantially. It dimensionally it's quite a bit because obviously, with the whole VW Rivian investment, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, how similar are they? Are they going to compete with each other, this and that?" The Scout is going to be substantially larger than an R1T or R1S,
And even
whatever.
equal for
Yeah.
equal on the bed. I don't remember how long the
Hmm.
bed is on a Rivian, but I suspect it's 5 to 5.5 feet. I suspect it's
Hmm.
comparable. If you are 6 inches or 10 inches wider,
Hmm.
which I don't know if that's if that's the case,
Hmm.
but if you
Hmm.
are wider, you can have the same length bed, but still fit all your
Hmm.
lifestyle stuff. That doesn't help you when it comes to like a sheet of drywall or
Or plywood. Yeah.
plywood or something like that. But when it comes to like what I do,
Hmm.
I stack wide. Like
Hmm.
when I go camping, I take because I gotta fit 5 bicycles in the back of the truck
Hmm.
and the sand toys and a table and a generator and ladder ball. Can't forget the ladder ball. I got a lot of stuff that's got to go in the back of the truck. So
Yeah.
I take my bikes and I mount them sideways
Hmm.
in the bed of the truck. And if you had a narrow truck, you couldn't do that.
Hmm.
And then 5 bikes wouldn't even fit in there. Now you got to start attaching them to it gives you a lot of options if you're just a
Hmm.
little bit wider. So I really appreciate a lot of this. Now
Hmm.
this doesn't tow as much as I need. I mean, actually, 10,000 pounds on the Terra and with a range extender,
Maybe.
this this gets dangerously because I'd need to the range extender. This is up
Yeah.
there with the Ram. What is it? The
Ram
Ram
Charger.
Charger
Yeah.
to me. And with a
Yep.
price starting at, I mean, they're saying 51.5 starting for the Terra, but that won't be with the range extender. So it's going to be 60 something thousand, I'm sure, when you're done. But
Mhm.
I bet this beats the Ram
Possibly. Yeah.
for price anyway,
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, I'd say a little different market. Um, I would say I would see this competing, like I said, I'm going to keep beating this dead horse. I would say more with the Wrangler and the Gladiator than I would say like F-150 or the Ram, or I mean, that's just my feeling, but
yeah, I
um,
guess I need to look at the wheelbase because wheelbase is a huge thing too when it comes to towing.
I think I read on the Terra, I think it said something like 128, um, which is more, it kind of splits the difference between mid-size and full size. So I think maybe that's a little bit longer than like a Colorado or a Ranger. but shorter than it would be on an F-150 or Silverado. So
Yeah, if it's too short of a wheelbase, that counts it out for me. But I love so we've spent a long time on this. What's your overall?
I like it. I unfortunately we're going to have to wait a little while. They're saying production targeted for 2027, so this is still about a little over 2 years out. Um, and there's still a lot of unknowns uh, on some kind of peripheral things. I mean, they kind of showed the overall concept and the styling, and I think that's probably going to stay put. Uh, it's going to be built in South Carolina, but we don't know if that plan is going to be UAW or not. I don't know if I'm getting too into the weeds with this, but recently the UAW organized the Chattanooga plant, so I'm sure they're going to try and organize the Scout plant as well.
Yeah, that it goes without saying.
Yeah. And the other unknown, and this is where it could get a little interesting and or sticky depending on your perspective. Um, I guess they announced at the introduction that they are going to try to do factory direct sales with this. So like Tesla, like Rivian, um, and the dealers are not too happy about this.
Yeah.
Obviously,
So Volkswagen's going to try to tick off everybody by saying it's going to be made in a non-union factory, and then we're not going to sell it in a dealership, and then watch the world explode at that
yeah.
point.
Well, I'd say it's a win-win for consumers, but the powers that be, yeah, are not too pleased about this. So, yeah. So who knows how that's ultimately gonna suss out how they're gonna handle this. Again, it's a non-issue in some states, but some states have very strict protectionist laws for dealerships, like
And
Texas, like
actually,
Michigan.
look,
Yeah.
for somebody like Volkswagen, this doesn't matter. If they
Hmm.
can sell in California and whatever other states, New York and whatever other states you can sell direct.
Hmm.
If they sell direct in those states, and then in the states that they can't, they just put them in Volkswagen dealerships.
Yeah. I would say maybe,
They've got an easy
yeah.
way, they've got a much easier way through. They could put a little dividing wall up and here's the scout section. Like they have a means to an end. Like Rivian can't do that.
Hmm.
They don't have I mean,
Yeah,
like even
Rivian's pretty much already all in, like factory direct. That's what we're doing.
Tesla can get around it at this point with all their
Mhm.
service
Service centers, yeah.
centers, where they've got service centers that I don't know if they do it, but they could act essentially like a dealership. If they've
Well,
got the real
they're
estate, they've got
delivery centers.
yes, yeah. But you get to things like Lucid,
Hmm.
Rivian, Canoe, Terra. Uh, uh, they don't have these options.
Hmm.
Volkswagen could, or Scout could pull the Volkswagen card if they had to get this thing out
Yeah.
there.
So one of the ways this could play out, like you're alluding to, is in the states that they're allowed to sell direct, they will sell direct. In the ones where there's a lot of obstacles or prohibitions to that, they may pair this with Volkswagen or Audi dealers potentially,
Hmm.
um, and have it kind of a add-on. I remember before Genesis kind of, so Genesis is an interesting case because at first it was a sub brand of Hyundai, and they were, I mean, they were, you would literally have like, at the time it was called the Equus, but it was now would be like the G80 or G90 right next to an accent,
Yeah.
kind of a weird juxtaposition. But that's how Genesis started, is kind of just an add-on to Hyundai. And eventually, once they kind of built their lineup and they developed more of a kind of a dealer infrastructure, they kind of branched out and became their own thing. But um, yeah, potentially in the early days, they could just kind of lump them in with VW or Audi dealers and just, hey, we got to, you know, here you go. So
Yeah.
I don't know how that's going to play out. But NADA has already said no, they're not going to get away with this. So we'll see. Maybe
We're
a little slightly less sanguine news for Volkswagen. Um, it's not looking too good for them on the home front. Um, it looks, you know, between increasing competition and pressure from the Chinese, um, less export demand. They're potentially looking at closing 3 factories in Germany. Um, so,
Now, do you think this has to do with having to produce everything in, like, if you're going to sell something in America, you pretty much got to make it here? I don't know what Volkswagen's India sales are, but they have very strict rules about
mhm,
vehicles that could
mhm.
be sold in India. Do you think that's a byproduct of all this, or is this like actual overall demand is down, not just demand in those factories because they've had to shift production to other factories?
I think it's a variety of things. First of all, the Chinese brands have moved very aggressively in the European market, including Germany. So the Chinese are taking more market share. There's less demand in places like China for German imports, even though, to your point, a lot of the VWs sold in China are made in China. Um, as I've alluded to before, Germany has very high labor costs. So they're at a disadvantage compared to China, Mexico, even the US. I think even though the US isn't particularly cheap, it's cheaper than Germany in terms of labor. Um, so I think it's just a matter of they're just kind of getting squeezed, and Volkswagen as a brand is not perceived of as being a quote premium brand like Audi, like Porsche. So I mean, they tried that in the early 2000s. I don't know if you remember the Phaeton and the
Hmm.
Touareg. They tried to go really upmarket, and I think the top trims of the Phaeton were over $100,000, and American consumers were like, "What the heck? This
Yeah,
makes
it was
no
a great
sense."
car, but
It
there
just
wasn't
really
much.
didn't fit
Yeah.
with the brand. So I don't think Volkswagen as a brand quite has the equity to command, super premium prices. So
So
they're
looking
just,
through this
yeah.
Reuters article, it
Mhm,
seems like there's multiple things at work here. You've got Volkswagen. I mean, it's all what
mhm,
Volkswagen says. Weakening demand, and it's really expensive to produce in Germany.
mhm, yeah.
And that's where, because I was reading from IG Metall or Metal or whatever they're
Mhm,
called, their union, where them saying that there's going to be consequences if they do this. And I'm like, what consequences? If there's no demand, you can't force
mhm.
somebody to make something that isn't
They can't
sellable.
sell, yeah.
But if the other side of the other, they're making one argument about low production or low
Mhm,
demand, but then they're saying that their operating costs are 25 to 50% above targeted costs.
mhm,
Now it's like, now I see where you're coming from. Now you're seeing that it is all cutting measures and production's just going to somewhere where it's cheaper. So it,
mhm,
it looks like there's multiple things. And of course, the union's not going to believe the first one of lower demand. They're only going to believe the second one of union costs are too much. So you want to cut the unions. And there's a whole other argument there.
yeah. So, it's Volkswagen's in kind of a weird place right now. So very hopeful with the Scout, kind of not so rosy uh back in Wolfsburg. So
Yeah.
we'll see how this all works out.
Speaking of Volkswagen,
Still in the family, so to
and I want to
speak.
get through this in the next 5 minutes because I got to get out of here and go pick up a kid.
All right.
Speaking of earlier, where we got to have vehicles that you can stuff plenty of kids in there. I've got to go and do that soon. So Porsche says its customers don't want EVs; they want ICE.
Yeah.
And Porsche, I've had this conversation. I guess it's Porsche, but nobody says Jaguar correctly in this country. So why
Yeah.
should I say Porsche correctly?
It's like Chevy, Chevrolet, Beamer, BMW. I don't know.
It'd be like calling
Porsche,
Chevrolet
whatever.
Chevrolet or something. It's like,
Chevrolet.
yeah, I don't know. Anyway, they've been saying this for a while though. What's new? Like Porsche's been saying that we're always going to make an ICE version of everything for
I
for a
guess
while now.
the change is previously they were like, okay, the 911 is going to be ICE as long as it's legally allowed, but everything else, including uh, the Cayenne, the Macan, the Boxster, everything else is going to be electrified. And I guess even at that, they're kind of getting some pushback, like, hey, we still want the experience. We want to hear the engine. We want the, I guess our customers they still kind of crave that visceral experience of internal
Hmm.
combustion. Um, Similarly, with I would say like Ferrari, Lamborghini. So a lot of the pushback from this really hard push toward electrification is coming from the super premium kind of performance brands like Ferrari, like Porsche,
Yep.
like Lamborghini.
Even Mate
Yeah,
Rimac says this as he runs
yeah.
Bugatti. He's even said the same thing, and he's got Rimac producing the arguably the world's best EV.
Certainly the fastest and most expensive, but
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, so there's something to, I mean, getting back to your point, if people are not buying what you're selling, and that's not good for business.
Yeah.
So
That's kind of the
if
end
they're
of the
getting
business.
pushback from the customers saying, "Hey, this is what we want to buy," I mean, it'd be kind of stupid not to sell what your customers want. So
Unless governments mandate that you've got to, which
again,
is
that's
which
yeah,
is I mean, worldwide it's happening. It's not just America. In fact, America is like one of the last ones where because we
yeah,
can't
we're
do
kind of the
anything on
one of
a
the holdouts, at
yeah,
least
and we're
from
the Wild
developed
West over here.
markets. Yeah,
Chances of us ever doing anything nationwide to ban ice is like slim to none. We'll just keep ratcheting up EPA requirements that makes it more and more difficult. So we're on a long road in
yeah.
America. We don't
So
have the guts to do anything quite like what California's done, and I think a couple other states have done, saying 2035 where new
mhm,
sales are ice only. I don't think federally that could happen in this country for many, many moons.
yeah,
But I was at a party over the weekend,
yeah.
and I was talking to somebody, and somebody said, "Yada yada yada." Phil has an EV podcast, and I was like, "Yes, I do." And so one of the guys was like, "Oh, what's your favorite EV?"
Dun, dun, dun.
And I was like, "Man, that's." I didn't have to think too hard about it, but I don't know if anybody's actually asked me that question. What would I buy if I were going to go out and I didn't have money as an issue? And it's the Porsche Taycan Sport Turismo
Oh, the
is what
wagon.
I
Yeah.
came up with. Yeah, low slung wagon. So you got the fast charging, you got long range, you've got a wagon, you've got high performance, you've got all of this that is
The whole
it's hard to
package.
beat. Yeah, it's the whole package in red. That the same one that we sat in at the
Yeah.
auto show. Like that's what I would buy. Obviously can't afford it, but that's what I buy. And then I started thinking like, would I buy any Porsche, any other Porsche?
Hmm.
Is there anything else they sell? And I don't think there is.
Interesting.
I think that would be the only Porsche that they currently sell. Now, I really like 993 air-cooled Porsches and
Hmm.
older. When they went to water-cooled, I don't know, whatever. Boxsters, they drive great, but eh, you know,
They kind of lost something.
yeah, the air-cooled, they were something. They didn't perform as well, say, as some of the other vehicles, but they back to what you were saying, the
A lot of
visceral
character.
feeling, the
Yeah.
yeah, like you can hear everything. It's like you're driving an old like dystopian machine around town. It's really weird.
There's
Right.
nothing. I mean, I can hear air-cooled Porsches have a very distinct sound. Like I can hear one coming a quarter mile away. I'm like, oh, air-cooled Porsche.
Yeah. I saw
Yeah.
one the other day driving down in my neighborhood. It was like
Hmm.
it grabs your attention
Hmm.
when you see like a 99 because this one was a 993.
Hmm.
But even the older ones, the ones from the 80s, which I don't know what those numbers were, but like what I consider like a traditional Porsche. It's like
Hmm.
after the speedsters and everything, but before they went to the
Hmm.
big bulbous things. Those are super cool. But right now, I think there's one Porsche I'd buy, and
Well,
it's the electric one. So apparently, I'm in a minority when it comes to. Well, no, actually not, because they're saying Porsche customers are pushing back, and I've never had one,
yeah.
driven them, but
Yeah.
never owned one.
Anyway,
Yeah,
all right. Well, we talked a lot about the Scout, didn't we?
we did, and now
Yeah.
we are at the point where I got to go and pick somebody up. So I don't know. We
I
can
don't know
push some of
if
this.
gift giving is a big deal on Halloween, but if you're so inclined, be sure to visit thewalkcard.com/store.
Yeah, it won't arrive in time for Halloween. But but for Thanksgiving, sure it'll be here.
There you go.
Walkart.com/store. You can buy t-shirts. Sad news, the backpack has been discontinued.
Oh,
So you can no longer get the backpack.
womp
That was
womp.
limited time offer. And I thought there was something else that might have been discontinued. Anyway, email us at hello@thewalkcar.com if you would like us to put anything else on the store, or if you've got any input. Now, I used to always push toward email us with any thoughts or comments. And at this point, that was how I thought that this worked. But now we've gone to YouTube, and YouTube, we're getting
Leave a
comments
comment.
on there. And it's fascinating because it's like instantaneous feedback that we get. So just go on YouTube and make a
Yeah.
comment and push the like button and subscribe, do whatever you want to do, because that is better communication to us than the email. You can email us if you want to say advertise, or like I said, if you got a t-shirt idea, something like that, or you want to get in touch with us in some other way that's more private, then definitely hello@thewalkcar.com. But outside of that, go to well, you know what? Go to thewalkcar.com, and there you'll find this episode, and you can click on that, and then that can take you off to the YouTube channel, and you can make a comment or whatever you want to do. Did I mention all the show notes are there as well? They are, and they're embedded in the podcast that you listen to. Thewalkcar.com/advertise, where Scout should really go and take an ad out on this network that we have, this ever-growing multimedia empire.
Yes. Look out, Joe Rogan.
Say that with a straight face. I think next week we got something special. People have to sit around and
Go
buy
through their
t-shirts
bag of
until
candy.
then, and then come back and be surprised next week.
All right. Till then, happy Halloween.